a cathedral. You're breaking me down.
One thing that always bugged me about stereo VCRs and other video devices with stereo sound, like video game consoles, is that you don't get a stereo RF output. This Fisher VCR from November 1984 proudly proclaims it has stereo TV audio, and it has large indicators on the front panel to show you when it's receiving multi-channel TV sound in either stereo or bilingual, better known as Second Audio Program or SAP. That's how you could hear The Simpsons in Spanish. But just like all later stereo VCRs, if you had it connected to your television via the regular coaxial cable, even if your TV was stereo, you only got mono sound, both from pre-recorded movies and from programs you recorded yourself. Of course, for the best quality, you should use the VCR's AV outputs, but you needed to have the antenna or cable input loop through the VCR anyway to be able to record TV programs.
Now I need your help to get back to the year 1985.
And for most people, the quality of the RF output was more than good enough, except you don't get stereo sound. After all, both VHS and Beta are below broadcast TV quality, so the tape was the limiting factor, not the quality of the RF connection. And even TVs which did have an AV input didn't always make it the most convenient to use. On some early models, to select the AV input, you needed to tune in a random high channel number, like channel 91. Who's going to remember that? And if you want to use an external RF modulator, you have to be careful. Just because they give you separate left and right audio inputs does not mean they give you stereo sound. They just combine the channels together to mono. And unfortunately, there was a lot of misleading marketing going on, with some RF modulators falsely claiming to be stereo, even when they're actually mono. The input is stereo, but the output to your TV is mono. Just to prove it, I have one of those modulators that was advertised as stereo on the packaging. And when I have it hooked up and tuned it in, I do get a signal, but right at the top there, the TV says mono. And disconnecting one of the two audio plugs makes no difference. The sound still comes out of both speakers equally. Even Philips engaged in this marketing deception with their RF modulator, which had a sticker on the packaging saying stereo output. And true stereo available through your stereo receiver or home theater. Only on the back of the packaging did it make it clear that the alleged true stereo output is not through the RF output to your TV. It was through a separate set of RCA audio output pass-through jacks to connect to your stereo receiver, which if you had, you probably wouldn't be using an RF modulator anyway. So it may seem like the only way to get actual stereo sound through your TV's antenna jack is to use a commercial-grade rack-mount Blondertongue Agile modulator. And the strangely named company will still gladly sell you a brand new one today for $2,228, not including the cost of the stereo option. Now here's a Radio Shack RF modulator, which at first glance doesn't look like anything special. It does say stereo RF modulator on the top of it, but as we've seen, that doesn't necessarily prove anything. Here was their ad for it. No AV inputs on your TV? We'll hook you up. Problem: you want to hook up a DVD player and a video game to a stereo TV without input jacks and get true stereo sound. Solution: Radio Shack Stereo RF Modulator. Hear your digital components the way they were meant to be heard, in true stereo. Provides 2 sets of stereo audio-video inputs, plus an S-video input. It includes stand for space-saving vertical setup, and the price was $39.99. On the back it has the typical connections we've seen before, except they're gold-plated. Ooh. Has a permanently attached power cord, left and right audio inputs, composite video input, S-video input, an antenna input pass-through, channel 3 or 4 selector, and the RF output to your TV. When you plug it in, it lights up stereo in blue, and it has a second set of inputs on the front, which you can select with this button, which illuminates front on the display. It came with a stand to mount it vertically if you want, and that blue stereo indicator stays on all the time, but if you're not currently feeding a video source into it, the modulator shuts off so you can use it as a pass-through. Now I have it connected to my TV, and when I tune it in, the TV actually says stereo. You can see right there in the top corner, stereo. I tested it out by connecting the modulator to a DVD player and using it as a CD player and listening to the music through my TV's headphone jack. The stereo separation isn't quite as wide as what I remember from broadcast TV, but it's still certainly good enough to achieve a full stereo effect. But one strange thing I noticed is that using the composite video input of the modulator actually gives you a sharper and clearer image than the S video input. So right now this is S video, pay attention to these icons, and that's composite. That's a little bit sharper, definitely is noticeable. Switch back to S video, and it just looks a little bit more fuzzy. There's less dot crawl, but it's just not as sharp as using composite. However, the same thing is true of this other modulator, so it's not something unique to the Radio Shack. To give you a direct hookup, I'll use my VTune Pro, which is basically an RF demodulator. It has inputs for TV and FM, and gives you a composite video and stereo audio outputs. I reviewed the VTune Pro a couple of years ago, and in that video, I didn't know whether or not the TV tuner in this was capable of receiving stereo sound, because I didn't have any source to verify that. Well, now I do, and I can tell you the TV tuner in the VTune Pro is capable of receiving MTS stereo TV sound. Pretty good, so how about a live camera feed into the RF modulator? I have the output of this old Digital 8 Handycam connected to the composite video and stereo audio inputs of the modulator, and then that's connected via RF into the VTune Pro, which is receiving it on channel 3. The output of the VTune Pro is going into this other Handycam, which is doing the video capture. So this is a live on-the-air camera feed run through the Radio Shack stereo RF modulator. Now I added a VCR into the mix so I can play you this Scotch VCR head cleaner tape, which doubles as a stereo audio test.
This is your 5th cleaning. Your video and audio heads will now be cleaned. This is a mono audio test. Stereo audio test, right channel. Stereo audio test, left channel. Do not press stop. Leave VCR in play and depress and hold the rewind scan search button until tape is fully rewound.
I think they knew what they were doing when they made the rocket look like that. Another neat thing about the VTune Pro is that it decodes closed captions, which proves that the caption information passes through the modulator intact.
They are our special friends, a constant in a changing world. Loyal companions, loving friends. Scientists have discovered that our pets not only help make us happier, they may also help make us healthier. Studies have shown that pets have many remarkable effects on people, like helping to keep morale high and stress lower. Pet companionship also helps lower the heart rate and the blood pressure of their human friends.
And if you're wondering how Radio Shack was able to make a stereo RF modulator, it says right on the top of it, CEX Stereo Technology. That led me to a company based in Garland, Texas called Cable Electronics Incorporated. They wrote, exclusive CEX sound technology, patented, found in our stereo modulators, is the only technology that can successfully combine surround sound and MTS stereo on a television signal and transmit through the medium of radio frequency down a single line coaxial cable, totally eliminating the need for an expensive, complex 3-wire installation. And here is that patent they mentioned, multi-channel television sound stereo and surround sound encoder suitable for use with video signals encoded in plural formats. Assigned to Cable Electronics Incorporated, filed July 25th, 2001. And they had a press release dated July 16th, 2003. New Motorola chip delivers stereo sound to TVs. First single-chip TV stereo encoder solves entertainment industry problem. That chip was the MC44C401, and the suggested resale price for it was $4.25 in quantities of 100,000. The stereo encoder chip is currently used in Radio Shack's new stereo RF modulator and is being integrated into set-top box products such as Dish Network and DirecTV satellite receivers. I actually have 2 of these Radio Shack stereo RF modulators, and at first glance they may look identical, but there are actually differences between them. The first one says Radio Shack Stereo RF Modulator, catalog number 15-2525. But then look down here, custom assembled in the USA with foreign and domestic components for Radio Shack Corporation. So this was actually assembled, just assembled, not made, but assembled in the USA. It has a date code of October 2003. And here's the second one, the same catalog number, 15-2525, but this one says custom manufactured in China for Radio Shack Corporation, and there's no discernible date code on this one. Here's the inside of the one that was assembled in the USA. It says CC Tech CD-1 and has a date code of the 21st week of 2003. The square chip is the stereo encoder. It's a Motorola 44MC400 FA. I thought that press release said it was the 401. This chip is an op-amp. It's an LMV324. And finally over here is the RF modulator chip of 44BC375 by Motorola as well. And here's the inside of the Chinese-made one. Even though it looks identical from the outside, inside it has a completely different board layout. It says 15-2525 main board, version D, July 4th, 2003. And this time all the chips are on the bottom of the board and are either covered by this metal shielding, which is soldered into place, which I will not attempt to remove, or some copper foil also to act as shielding and maybe as a bit of a heat sink. I believe it's using a later revision of the Motorola MTS stereo encoder chip, the MC44C402, which according to Chris Cuff, even some of the American assembled ones use. And if you're hoping to connect the modulator directly to an antenna to use it as a little over-the-air TV transmitter, unfortunately it's not going to work that well. The receiving antenna needs to be almost touching it to get a good picture. Even just a few feet away, you start losing the signal. So it's a very low output power as regulated by the FCC, so it doesn't really work as a transmitter unless you add an amplifier. Unfortunately, the Radio Shack stereo RF modulator was a good idea about 6 years too late, because it didn't hit store shelves until the fall of 2003, when analog standard definition TV was on its way out and the need for such a product was diminishing. And I question just how many TVs were stereo but lacked AV inputs, because from what I recall from the CRT era, most sets that were 20 inches and larger were stereo and did have AV inputs, while most sets that were 19 inches and smaller were mono. In which case, an ordinary mono RF modulator would have done the job at half the cost of Radio Shack's stereo model. And the cost differential would have been even higher if the Radio Shack salesperson attempted to upsell you to their Easy Answers stereo DVD install kit, including fancy gold-plated AV cables. In 2004, Radio Shack replaced the 15-2525 stereo RF modulator with the model 15-2526, which looks nearly identical except for the lack of front panel inputs. I think it's using the same case molding, but it's not stereo, it's mono. So that's about it for the Radio Shack stereo RF modulator. Obviously a product of limited usefulness in this day and age, but I just think it's neat to be able to tune in an analog TV signal 17 years after analog TV went off the air and see stereo show up on your TV's display and hear real stereo sound coming out of an analog RF channel on your TV.
Adios.